Is America truly independent from Great Britain 250 years on? It's 2026, and we're coming up to July 4th, Independence Day for the Americans. But it's actually the Declaration of Independence, of course, in 1776, and more importantly, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations is important. Great Britain and America are two separate countries. They're two separate sovereign countries. So it should be pretty straightforward to say that they are independent. But often independent countries have trade agreements. They have free trade agreements. Great Britain and America don't have one yet. Now, before 1776, there was a British preacher called George Whitefield who went to America, and he taught the Americans how to evangelize and how to preach. Benjamin Franklin used to listen to him and was amazed that tens of thousands of people could hear George Whitefield without the need of shouters, or I think they were called, who would repeat what people were saying at the front to people down the back. And that was used by William Gladstone, the Prime Minister, 100 years later. Now, George Whitefield died in 1770, but he fired up the American colonials, and not necessarily with Republican sentiments, but with moral sentiments and religious sentiments. And the American colonialists realized pretty quickly that Britain had a great interest in fighting the Dutch and the French and their continental foes, and American colonialists felt used and were not happy with the way Britain behaved, and with good reason. And Louisburg, that the French had, the Americans helped the British get back, and then the British just hand Louisburg back to the French. The American colonialists were not amused. They were very unamused, and more than that, if the American colonialists had not fought against the British, they really would have lost a huge amount of credibility globally and historically for not fighting against what the British did. Now, we all know about the Boston Tea Party, and that's terribly entertaining. No taxation without representation, fair comment. But also, it needs to be understood that when Benjamin Franklin went to Britain to talk to the British, he was very much in favor of the British supporter. But he came out of those meetings, especially after a run-in with one Scottish lord, and thought, gee, we can't deal with these people on current terms. We're going to have to part ways. And that's effectively what happened. There was a parting of the ways, but it's difficult to call it full independence because of the history, the law, Magna Carta, the language, the custom, the belief. And we'll come to this later in relation to where we've ended up between Britain and America. It's important to realize that, say, take Lafayette, the first Marquis Lafayette, who visited Britain in 1774 when I think he was just 16 or 14. I can't remember how old he was. Henri Joseph Paul Lafayette. They still had a king in France. They'd heard about the colonial wars. French weren't necessarily well disposed to the Americans. But when he went to Britain, Prince William Henry, who was the Duke of Gloucester and Edinburgh, the king's brother, who sort of allied himself with the liberals, with the Whigs, let's say, helped radicalize Lafayette. And Lafayette realized there was a lot of British people who really didn't approve of Britain's heavy hand in America. They really didn't. And I'd say most of Britain didn't either, because it's 3,000 miles away. Just let the colonials manage themselves, as they are probably best to do in their situation, being in theatre, in situ. So this notion that Britain and America fought with one another is really problematic in that, yes, there was a fight, but the majority of Britain's heart wasn't in it, and to the point that the king's brother was merrily radicalizing Lafayette in support of the American colonials, and Lafayette went back to France and then went off to America 2 years later, where he fought and took command and was helping the American colonials, but not out of pure French zeal from day one, but because he'd gone to Britain 2 years before and found that there were plenty of British people, including the king's brother, the Duke of Gloucester and Edinburgh, Prince William Henry, who allied himself with the liberals, with the Whigs, who were quite, ambivalent to the war and positive towards the American colonialists. Now, opinions may have hardened later, but the reality is that's a dramatic blow to any kind of narrative that it was black and white, good and bad, day and night. It just wasn't. It was a very nuanced war. And America had a lot of support in Britain and always has had. Now, moving forward, we all know that there was rows between the British and Americans, and then the Americans burnt some people's houses. Then the British came down and burnt Washington, D.C., and the White House, and so on and so forth. That was always going to happen. The British were always going to give America a bloody nose after the War of Independence. Yeah, that was always going to happen. And it did happen. And what could America do? And America's been very good sports ever since, and good on, well, reasonably good sports. British and American cooperation has been very strong, even from day one. I mean, the British helped the Americans purchase Louisiana from Napoleon through Barings Bank. I mean, the things of British and American cooperation is very long. And basically Great Britain and America have been thick as thieves for 200 years. And there's no real way to get around it. It's quite embarrassing for some American Republicans who try to behave differently. But they've learned just to shut up and not really talk about it because they don't have a leg to stand on. When Prince William and his wife, Princess Catherine, went to Boston, they went to a basketball game, and a whole group of Bostonians managed a sort of confronting chant of USA, USA for William and Kate. But, that's pretty much a damn squid. That's pretty pathetic. That's being flogged with warm lettuce, basically. If that's all you can do is a few chants of USA, USA, it's not very morale boosting for American Republicans. But there's other parts to the relationship that it's very, very important to go through. And the Second World War is a big one that people don't understand. And the main thing to know about that is that Professor Henry Tizard, in 1940 took a trove of secrets to America that one person in America mentioned as the most valuable treasure to ever come to America. I think that's beyond any question. It was 1,000, 1,000,000 times more valuable than anything else. In there was the blueprints for the atomic bomb. There was the blueprints for mobile radar, plastic explosive, self-sealing fuel units, the plans for jet engines, rocket chargers. The list was endless. The military secrets that America got in 1940 in return for giving the British access to their manufacturing lines was astonishing. I mean, America was never going to look back after that. America was gifted a very powerful position that no one else had by the British in 1940 in return for a deal. Now, the British did well. They basically sold for 110 cents in the dollar. So instead of doing a distressed deal, they got a very good deal, a massive deal that helped them defeat Hitler along with the Russians. But the reality is that America got a very, very sweet deal that made America very, very strong. And it was that, and not other things, that made America very, very strong. So after World War II, certainly if you listen to, say, Tucker Carlson, America had taken over. And the reality is that America took over a lot of liabilities, a lot of bills, and they didn't support Britain when it came to the Suez Crisis. But I think Britain very much got a very good deal out of the Second World War in terms of how they dealt with France and Germany. And of course, 50s Britain, even though it was not the happiest place all the time, it was the Britain of Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile, after which many people did it. So Britain had the mindset to make that a win through Roger Bannister. That was all about mindset. Okay. And no other country had the mindset, the winning mindset. America didn't have the winning mindset to do what Roger Bannister did. No other country in the world did. And that irks a lot of other countries, that Great Britain had the winning mindset that allowed Roger Bannister to break the 4-minute mile. But that is the truth. That is reality. There is absolutely no point in denying it. Plenty of other people could run the 4-minute mile once Roger Bannister of England had done it first. But sorry, it took an Englishman. It took Great Britain to do it first because we had the winning mindset. And that's what made Britain great then. And of course, means it's great now and was great before then as well. But on top of that, it was other things as well. And Concorde was done in conjunction with the French. The Americans could never get a supersonic passenger jet up and running. So they got into space, which is great, but they couldn't do supersonic passenger jet travel. Then aside from that, in 1956, Queen Elizabeth II opened the Calder Hall nuclear power reactor, the first general purpose nuclear reactor and the first commercial nuclear power reactor in the world. Once again, a world first, massive world first, not just a generational, it was a once in a millennia world first. And what you need to understand here is that America had actually also had a world first that is sort of celebrated in America, but because it's such a young country, I don't think they understand it. And that world first was the creation of the digital chip. There should be a 50-meter, that's 150 feet tall for you in America, there should be a 50-meter tall computer chip statue in Washington, D.C. or New York, or probably in all those capitals, actually. But there isn't. And that's because historians have failed to understand that that was the key world first moment, once in a millennia, a global first that America achieved at Bell Labs, that was very, very important, a bit like the nuclear reactor or Roger Bannister and his mindset change that allowed him to break the 4-minute mile. So I think the key point about empires is the British Empire, you can't stop it on a dime, a bit like a supertanker going into Rotterdam, takes 10, 12 miles with the engines on full reverse to slow it down. So Britain is still going. It's somewhat diminished, but it's still on the Security Council, still got the bomb, still got the army, the navy, the money, if they choose to rev things back up again, which I think they'll need to. And in terms of independence, America and Britain play such a close team game that, and the fact they don't have a real free trade agreement makes it look like they're not that independent. They just seem to play the ball down the field and cooperate to a very substantial extent. And that's just the reality. So 250 years on, America and Britain have done very well. They've done very well together, and they've still got the same problems that they'll need to face together in terms of financing the individual, the corporation, and the government properly, which I think they're looking at doing now, and which I've spoken about elsewhere. But yeah, not nearly as independent as some Americans would have you believe. And Great Britain is called Great Britain for a reason, whether you like it or not.